Since 2005, my seminars and studios at the GST have investigated the function or agency of aesthetics in architecture. The seminars have focused on three concepts of ornament, form, and style, and the studios have investigated the materiality of built forms that include physical elements such as roofs, envelopes, structure, as well as non-physical materials such as time or techniques such as tessellation. Rem Koolhaas has stated, and I quote him, "No architect in their right mind would dare to write today on elements of architecture that intended to describe both what the components of architecture are and how they should be put together. But the architect's role is to put elements together in a certain way. Refuting the notion of finding ideals, such as the 5 points of architecture, does not mean abandoning the question of how and why architects assemble elements. How then can architects make a difference in people's daily lives? After all, tying ourselves around a tree or sticking a solar panel on a building are not architectural ways to make a difference to people's thinking about the environment or the economy. The function research investigates the assembly of architectural material as the core of an architect's agency. It investigates how using the practical matters of daily life as the raw materiality of architecture grounds the assembly of buildings and therefore their aesthetic experience in everyday life rather than the search for ideals. Each built form that serves a daily life use comprises of a myriad of elements that can be assembled differently. There are also numerous experts that provide the architect with diverse inputs. Nevertheless, it is the architect that assembles all those elements into a coherent form and determines what is audible or inaudible, traversable and not traversable, visible or invisible, touchable or untouchable, closed or open, fixed or movable, transparent or opaque, and the colors, geometries, and structures which are present, and in doing so determines the aesthetic presence of built forms, the cluster of affects that spreads directly out of their thisness, and which does not represent anything. It is autotelic and cannot signify any specific meaning in the sense of communication. Rather, it exists like a language prior to words, which individuals will perceive not as facts, but as a thing in the world, which making sense of it in a particular context will create tacit knowledge and unthought associations, which in turn influence the way people think and act in relationship to their everyday life around them and the different meanings they attribute to it. Built forms may not signify anything, but there is no doubt that they are a platform to people who encounter them, especially since they are always experienced in the context of a specific activity or use. As they are repeated over time, certain conventions of assembly evolve and lead to habits of behavior in the people who use them, such as, for example, here in the habits of behavior prompted in people by this arrangement of seats in a cinema as opposed to this one. This arrangement is not a more ideal way to watch a film. Rather, by creating a break from the conventional way of watching a movie in a cinema, even at a micro scale, it frees people from a way of perceiving the cinema which has become so habitual that it seems almost inevitable. The style research investigates this as the agency of architects, how by reconfiguring conventions of arrangements, architects can generate new encounters between people and daily life and invite them to form new assemblages with them, the experience of which leads to their perception, understanding, or know-how. For example, rather than simply passing through a ferry terminal, people might use it as a place to sit down and paint. The architect's role is not to determine or design an ideal ferry terminal, which is impossible since each individual will perceive it and experience it differently, but rather by disrupting conventions associated with such a building to free them to creatively respond to it rather than simply habitually react. So too, the architect's role cannot be to determine an ideal way for people to use their private balconies, but rather by changing conventional arrangements in such buildings, disrupt habits of using such private outdoor spaces, or through the play between the conventions of arrangements of atriums in tall office buildings and the production of new ones, engage the politics of workplace away from introversion, cellularization, and standardization to transparency, communication, and complexification, or by making different choices regarding the assembly of galleries in a museum to alter the conventions associated with viewing of art. By choosing to interrupt conventions, architects not only ground architecture in the micropolitics of everyday life rather than ideals, they also ensure that the built environment is in a state of constant change and develops as a multiplicity.